Hey everyone, welcome to Wildlife Inspired. I'm your host, Scott Keys. Today we're going to discuss wildlife photography with a little shorter focal length. Specifically, can you do bird photography with a 300 millimeter lens? Right after this. This video was inspired by a comment that was left in one of my previous videos. The comment was, it's really great. I enjoy your videos, but you've got these big lenses. And what about the people that are just beginning? What about somebody that's shooting with a shorter lens? 300 millimeters was the example they used. And I thought, that's a really great point. So I reached back into the archives and I looked over the past couple years for anything that I shot with a 300 millimeter lens. Now, I also want to make a note here. I included images shot on a 400 millimeter lens as well, but those are all on a full frame sensor. Now at the bottom, I'm going to put chapters in here. This first chapter, I'm going to keep it very brief, but it's going to explain real quickly what focal equivalency means when I use it in this video. If you understand that concept, you can skip to the next chapter where the pretty images start and you can get onto what those images look like. But for this first section, I just want to explain focal equivalency quickly. Down in the comments, I'm sure somebody's going to, anytime I bring up this concept, people argue it back and forth about what is focal equivalency. I'm going to keep it very simple. When you shoot on a crop sensor, a smaller sensor, so full frame sensor looks like this, crop sensor looks like this. When the resolution, when the number of pixels is the same on a full frame sensor and a crop sensor, the crop sensor will appear to magnify the image. In Nikon's case, they assign a crop factor of 1.5, meaning the images appear 50% larger than they would on a full frame camera with the same resolution. And that has to do with pixel density. It's the number of pixels that are packed in. So these crop sensors often have the same number of pixels packed into smaller space. What you're not doing is magnifying the image coming in. The image coming in through the lens, whether it's 300 millimeters in this case, is the same. It's just projecting onto a smaller space that has the same number of pixels. There's a lot of videos out there that explain pixel density, that explain crop factor equivalency or focal length equivalency. But for this video, I just need you to understand a 300 millimeter lens on a crop sensor, a Nikon crop sensor, will give you a 450 millimeter equivalency. It will appear the same as a 400 millimeter lens, in this case, a 450 millimeter lens, which they don't make, but if they did, project it onto a full frame sensor at the same pixel density, at the same resolution. So in my images, you're going to see 300 millimeter lens on a crop body, which is what most people are going to have when they're starting out. You're going to see a 400 millimeter lens on a full frame body, but not a high megapixel full frame body. And then you're also going to see some 300 millimeter lenses with a teleconverter on a full frame body for 420 millimeters of focal equivalency. So everything you're going to see here is 450 millimeters focal equivalency or less. And to do this, I actually started really, really small. And the way we're going to progress through this, we're going to start small and we're going to work our way up. Hopefully that explains a little bit about focal equivalency or focal length equivalency. And if you want to learn more, there's plenty of YouTube videos out there. Maybe I'll make one for myself in the future, but I always struggle to explain this concept without a lot of diagrams and illustrations, and I didn't want to do that in this video. Now we're on to the images. Now you're going to notice up here, I've got a Flickr page. It's S-Keys Images. I don't have a lot of engagement there, but I do post a lot of images. Actually, I almost use it as an archive site. So if I'm on my mobile phone, I can pull up Flickr real quick and I can see every photo that I've ever posted to social media there as well. So that's part of this workflow that I use. The nice thing is you can actually go into this album. So if you go to my Flickr page, S-Keys Images, and you look at the album under 450 mm, you're going to see all of these images. I want to start, and the way I did this is I started with the smallest focal length and I work my way up. So here I'm actually shooting at 28 millimeters on a full frame body. Now I don't recommend 28 millimeter lenses for bird photography, but I did want to show you that there's a wide variety of focal lengths that you can use for bird photography. These are normally remote setups, and in this case I had a trigger. I put this about 3 inches away from where the birds were coming into a feeder, set up some rocks, and I got an image like this. So 28 millimeters, let's work our way up from here. Now we're looking at a 70 to 200 millimeter lens on a full frame body. This one shot at 70 millimeters. I wanted to capture the the scope and the scale of these snow geese as they were swirling around. And interesting thing about this photo, the little lights on the left-hand side of that photo, that's my house. So it was kind of neat to include this. I actually printed this for my home because I thought it was neat to have an image of my home that was also kind of a birdscape. So I wanted to capture the chaos of the moment of these snow geese flying through behind my house. You can also shoot songbirds with shorter focal lengths, but in this case, obviously, we're including a lot of habitat, and that's going to be a common theme with shorter focal lengths. This is at 200 millimeters. It might even be smaller. I'm going to scroll up once in a while. You'll see me do this, and you'll see the settings come up. So you actually, once in a while, I'll flash these settings, but you can see this was at 200 millimeters, 70 to 200 on a full frame body. So this is very small in frame, but the habitat's really nice. And I like this image. I actually entered this into a contest recently. I'm going to show you a few more 70 to 200 millimeter images, and you can see that you can get some portraits with this as well. Now you do have to be very close, so you're looking at cooperative subjects, and I wanted to include this because sometimes with cooperative subjects you can get some insects. I do some macro photography, and I do have a dedicated macro lens. The 70 to 200 does offer me the ability to do macro-like work, so I would encourage you to play around with this as well. If you want to experiment and play with the 300 millimeter or the 200 millimeter focal lengths, sometimes experimenting and working on composition and light, insects could be a cooperative subject to work with as well. So I just wanted to throw this in there to show that. Now, I'm going to move down. You're going to see my settings change a little bit here. I've got a full frame body with a 300 millimeter lens at 300 millimeters. The focal equivalency here of 300 millimeters is shorter than what most people are going to be shooting, even in beginning photography. The point is to show scale and to show how much size relative to the habitat and to the frame you can achieve with this focal length. So again, 300 millimeters, pretty small, but notice this, headshot. I'm real tight. Now I'm very close to this, and we're going to talk about proximity and sometimes the desire to get close as this video goes on, but I did want to show this as well. This is, again, 300 millimeter, true focal equivalency. Now I'm going to scroll down here and you're going to see the lens change. So I'm up to 400 millimeters on the same full frame body. And I have a pretty good assortment of images here, so I'm going to move pretty quick. I am going to pause for a minute and just explain one thing. I'm using professional grade equipment. I can't apologize for that. I'm very blessed to have it. I've accumulated it over years. The scale is going to be the same. So this 400 millimeter focal equivalency you can achieve with your 300 millimeter lens on a cropped body. In fact, you'll be a little bit tighter than this. What you won't be able to do or replicate is the low light that I'm able to shoot in. I'm shooting in very low light here at an aperture of 2.8, which is 2 stops less than most beginning photographers have available in their lenses. I'm also shooting on one of the best sensors that Nikon makes for low light photography. So I get there's a huge advantage there. So I have to put that out there. I get that it's different than beginner equipment. The focusing is faster. All of that is true. But if we're looking at the scale, that is the same. So the scale of this image is what you can achieve in terms of scale with a 300 millimeter lens. And all of this next series of images will be, let me go back because I really like that one. It's one of my favorite images. Really love the backgrounds. We're going to talk about the habitats in here. You're going to see some a little bit closer, like this hooded warbler with his tail was flared out. In the next frame, he jumped off the branch. So this is him preparing to leap. You can see he kind of crouches down. I do want to pause on this to talk about scale and also posing. The vast majority of these images are taken during fall migration. So I'm able to have locations where I can photograph really well and get very close looks. So some of these are very close. This, my guess, is about 10 feet away, 12 feet away. It's not something everybody can do. As you become more experienced as a birder or a photographer, locations become critically important, and none of these images are taken by me chasing a bird. That just doesn't work. Images like this are hours and hours and hours. I'm very fortunate I can drive up to a mountain and sit there and watch sunrise and photograph birds in September, and I do it quite often. So this isn't me going out for 15 minutes and finding it. It's me knowing where these birds migrate through, and so a lot of these songbird images especially are during fall migration. I also want to point out one other thing. You look at a bird like this, I want you to notice the relaxed nature of the pose. Notice the wings are not out and the tail is not raised. This is a very natural looking pose, and you'll see that as a theme. This is a Philadelphia vireo. an American redstart, prairie warbler, ovenbird, all at the same 400 millimeter focal equivalency. Another prairie warbler, and black-throated green, Canada warbler. And you'll see all different scales, but all very pretty. Now I'm going to stop here again and talk about that relaxed nature. These birds are just migrating. They're just moving through, which for me is a really good time of year. It's a little tougher to photograph because they don't really stay still very often, and it's very unpredictable. So some days it's like feast or famine. I may get 10 or 15 species. Other days I see nothing. But one of the advantages to fall migration is these birds are just moving very naturally, and they're feeding casually as they move through. So I get some shots where they're posed for a minute. I get some shots where they're feeding, and all of them, though, they look very relaxed. I use sound callback in my photography, but I'm very, very, very cautious about how it's used. One thing I don't like to photograph at all are aggravated songbirds or agitated songbirds. And this occurs often when they're defending territories or they're having disputes with other birds. It can also be elicited when somebody's playing callbacks to bring them in closer. And while I do that, I'm very, very cautious about the amount of time that I spend with a bird, and I'm extremely cautious about eliciting aggressive responses. So while I may use sound, I don't want a bird attacking me or a perceived sound. So the sounds that I use are very different. I even play running water. So those are the types of things that I do. I may use the sounds of other species that aren't related to this bird just to draw in curiosity. So those are some of the things that I do. But what's very, very important to me, and when I look at other people's work, is do these birds feel natural and relaxed and performing everyday functions that they do? So I wanted to I'll stop on this bird because I think this one's a really good example of that, where he just literally plopped on a branch in front of me for a minute and then took off. This was really great. I set up on these berries for a week, and I just waited for a bird, and finally this northern parula jumped on top of these berries. You see the little droplets of water on there. Really, really love that. I'm going to scroll down again. Just to confirm, you could see down here, I'm still at 400 millimeters on that full frame sensor. And now notice the habitat and colors become very important. When I'm photographing in spring, in fall, I'm able to get a lot of really nice color. In winter, it's much tougher. I will tell you, shorter focal lengths in winter, especially for small birds like sparrows and finches that might be around, or if you're in the south, you might have warblers down there too. But if there's not a lot of vegetation, it becomes a little bit tougher. As habitat becomes more important, color becomes important as well. And I'll give you some examples of that as we go through. This is a chestnut-sided warbler in fall. I've been trying to get this warbler for a long time. I was really excited to get that guy because their fall colors are much different. Right at sunrise, black-throated green warbler jumps right in front of my lens. And here's a good example of that feeding, that migratory feeding that you can take advantage of. Small in frame, notice the color in the background, solid color. If this was just sticks and branches in the background, would not be the same image. Here, small in frame, shows the feeding behavior, but also a really nice backdrop back there. So really, really like that one. Still at 400 millimeters, getting a little closer. A lot of these were taken the same day up in fall during migration. I'm going to scroll down and just make sure. Yep, I'm still at 400 millimeters here. I talked about the noise and the big advantage. You'll see this one is shot at ISO 2800 at f2.8. F4, that ISO jumps up. Now you're approaching 6,000, and at f5.6, you're up closer to 8,000, 10,000 ISO. So I have a big advantage shooting at 2.8. So, and most of that is around noise and low light. Pine warbler. I think it's a magnolia warbler. This is my spark bird. Sometimes I pause. I apologize if I smile because it brings back memories. So I see these images, and sometimes I just have these fond memories of where I was and photographing this bird. I remember this day. I remember the light and just absolutely loving it. And he just popped right up on this branch in front of me. There's a prairie warbler. These are all overcast days. There was a lot of haze up there a couple mornings a few years ago when I was shooting this. Some of these images go back as far as 2018. I think that's as far as I went back. So I'm going back 3 years on a lot of these. I love how the eye on this is mirrored in the stem. But again, the focal equivalency you'll see down here is, oh, I've moved up to 420. Let me go back. At some point here, I wanted to try to be fully transparent with the settings. I jumped up to 420 millimeters right here. So starting with this bird, I either shot on a D4S or a D5, and I put a 300 millimeter with a teleconverter. So these are all at 420. But again, we're trying to keep under 450, which is the focal length of that 300 on a crop sensor. So I'm still under that focal length right now. Even though I'm using a full frame body, it's not a high megapixel body. So the proportions, the scale of these birds in frame is very true to what you would get at 300 millimeters on a crop. And look at how close this is. I will tell you, getting them this close is very difficult. You're not going to chase birds and get this close. This is me being in the right place long enough that sometimes it happens. This is probably the 300 millimeter lens I have focuses to 6 feet. This is probably 6 to 7 feet away from me. And they come up from below. So I'm actually on a cluster of, I have a series of about 8 locations that I shoot in the fall. And they typically, I'm as high as I can get. So they come up from below me, and you can actually see I'm shooting down a little bit on this guy, but very, very close. This is not easy for a beginner. I mean, beginners getting this close to birds is not going to be easy, but I don't want you to think this has to be every bird. I don't actually love having all my birds look like this. A little habitat. So you see here a little bit more habitat, a lot of color. Taking advantage of that is really great. This also at 420. Shorebird's a little bit bigger, so I did some silhouettes with the some of that bokeh in the background. Threw in a coyote. I just 420 millimeters. I figured if you do other things other than birds, those shorter focal lengths are absolutely appropriate. In fact, a lot of wildlife photographers who shoot bigger game, especially if they can get closer looks, prefer a zoom lens or a shorter focal length where they can maybe add a teleconverter if they need it, or take it away if they want to get the subject with a little bit of scenery. That was a slow shutter speed that I was using. Took some images from a, I'll pull it up here. You can see still at 420. Plenty of light in this image. So I'm at f8, 2500th of a second. So not a whole lot of advantage of having a low light sensor. You could easily shoot this exact same scene with a 300 millimeter lens. Now the blind that I'm shooting from in Texas, I wanted to experiment and see what it was like. Wasn't my favorite experience. I really do enjoy just being out in nature and exploring. So this wasn't my favorite experience, but you could easily shoot a setup like this with a 300 millimeter lens. Using feeders, even in your backyard, with some nice perches around, you can definitely achieve this because you're all going to get more comfortable and you're going to get some closer looks. Shorebirds, really, really easy to shoot. I wanted to pause here for a second and talk about what 2 different focal equivalencies look like. And I put this on Instagram, and most people preferred this image. It's shot at 420 millimeters. I actually went vertical versus the horizontal, which was at 750 millimeter focal equivalent. So this is D500 with a 500 millimeter lens, a 750 millimeter focal equivalent, versus this image, and I'll pull it up here so you can see, the D4S, 300 millimeters with a teleconverter. That puts me at 420. So if you like this style, it's going to be a little bit tougher. You got to get really, really, really close to get this. I would have to be about 8 feet, 10 feet away from this meadowlark to get this. But don't think that there's anything wrong with this. In fact, most people liked this image better. I like this image better. But I'm thinking a little bit more about composition. I actually had to remember moving a little bit to get the sky where I wanted it. So you just have to be sometimes a little bit more thoughtful in terms of the mood and the composition. Now, this last series is a true indicator. This is 300 millimeters on a crop sensor. This is what the vast majority of people that we're talking about for this video are going to be shooting. 300 millimeters on a crop sensor. The advantage I have, this is a 300 2.8 lens. So yes, it's a high quality lens, but it's what I have. I can't go out and make a lens that I don't have. So this is what I have. So the big difference again is going to be the amount of light that's let in. This lens will probably focus a little bit faster than a kind of a beginner type lens. And it may be a little bit more clear, but I'm not shooting tight portraits. So I don't need I don't need to be hyper focused on detail here. I just need pretty scenes. And these are pretty scenes. Waders are great subjects to work at with 300 millimeters. Great subjects. Here's another one. And you'll see I'm getting a lot of background. You can also get a little bit tighter. So here's the same, I think this was the same day where I got all of these shots. Nice day out in the marsh. You notice the hard light here. I'm trying to capture some, I was hoping he would flap or move around. So higher shutter speed, hard light, but I want to show you the difference between these two. Look at the difference in light. This is probably about 45 minutes later. I'm probably sitting in the same area. They just kept going back and forth in front of me. So I'm just going to sit there and wait. They get comfortable with me. They start performing. This guy's eating. And look at the light. It's beautiful. Like, this is gorgeous light to shoot in. But not a video about light, but I do want, it's one of the number one things I try to show people is just, can you see the difference in the light? Like, if you could see that difference, once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And all of a sudden this becomes very unflattering, used for action almost exclusively. I try to stay away from portraits with this, and you get into this light and it's just sexy. All right, a few more here. All of these 300 millimeter on a D500 crop sensor for a focal length of 450 equivalent. This is a female hooded warbler. I want to stop here for a second because this is the proportions that are going to be very common with 300 millimeters. Yes, sometimes you may be lucky and get a little closer. Sometimes you're going to have more scenery. This is probably about 20 feet away. I'm guessing it's 15 to 20 feet away, which is a decent range for songbirds because you're not so close that they're going to be afraid of you, but they're not so far away that the image itself becomes very difficult. So you see a little framing leaf up here, but this is a nice scale. This is a nice balance for me. And this is achievable. Any beginning photographer can go out and create an image like this. If you know where the birds are, if you can get eye level, there's nothing wrong with these proportions. So I thought I wanted to pause on that. And then same thing with these Canada warblers, but notice the background is nice and solid, some bright spots in there. Editing comes into play. I do, just as a full disclosure, if there's small branches in here, I'll take them out. I need to put that out there because some people say, why don't you tell people that you edit your videos? I've never hidden it. So I do edit some of these backgrounds. But what's important to me is the integrity of the scene. I try to always leave the integrity. I don't add things. I don't replace the sky. So I've said this several times throughout my videos, but I do want to put that out there. I do remove branches. I actually teach people how to do it on my Patreon account. So I teach how to edit out branches and distractions. Very close wood duck there. And just some different looks, you know, experimenting with backlight. I love the way that vine is wrapped around there. Another wood duck. It's a pretty close look here. I remember, again, I just remember these days. So these are all, again, all shot 300 millimeters. No teleconverters, just 300 millimeters on a crop sensor. Here playing around with composition, I remember moving around back and forth to get this lined up the way I wanted. And I want to stop with two images here. This one and this one. This was shot, I was trying to do a video concept last year about kit lenses. This is about the cheapest lens Nikon makes. It's a 55 to 300. If you own this lens, I'm not slamming the lens. It was soft and it wasn't focusing where I needed it to. I could have calibrated this. I didn't take the time to calibrate it. I didn't really notice it till after I was done with the shoot, but I took this kit lens out to experiment and see what could I get. Could I shoot with a kit lens? The answer was, with this one, probably not. The images were a little bit too soft on the subject, but again, it wasn't calibrated to my camera body. Most expensive lenses, you don't have to calibrate too much, but sometimes third-party lenses, in this case, this Nikon probably needed to be calibrated with a fine adjustment because the focal plane was just off. However, if the focal plane wasn't off, I would post this image. If that bird was sharper, I would post this image taken with the cheapest lens that Nikon makes. Is it as good as my 300 2.8? No, it's absolutely not. It is leagues below that. However, if it was focusing the way it should have been, composition is good here. The background is good here. Shooting at 300 5.6. It's a pretty image. That could be a very pretty image. If you're shooting with the 70 to 300 for Nikon, or Canon's equivalent, the 100 to 400 Canon, actually probably a little step up, but a really great camera. These are all achievable. So if you've got that 300 millimeter lens, you can absolutely do it. There's a 300 f4 that's out there. Some older lenses that you can buy on the used market that will serve you very, very well. It's very, very achievable. So I'm going to end on this, and I'm going to go back and just give you some closing thoughts. So a little different for me. I'm going to wrap up with just a few thoughts. Can you take pretty bird pictures with 300 millimeters? The answer is absolutely yes. Did I have an advantage in that I have maybe some higher end gear that I've acquired over years. Yes, but you can do it at 300 millimeters. A couple things to think about. One is, what is your style gonna look like, and what do you want it to feel like? If you like a style that includes a little bit more habitat, and I mentioned thinking like a landscape photographer. If you think like a landscape photographer, it's going to help you a lot. Think about everything else except the subject. What's the scene look like? And how can I maximize this scene? Always shooting in pretty light with good perspective is going to be to your benefit, regardless of whether you're shooting a 300 millimeter or 500 millimeter. But the more habitat you include, sometimes the more important things like nice light can be, and also nice backgrounds, things that are full and pleasing. Can you get closer? I showed you some examples. Yes, you can get closer. Larger subjects might help. So wading birds, 300 millimeters, great focal length for wading birds. And for shorebirds, it can be very effective as well. I showed you some examples there. Songbirds are a little bit smaller for the most part, so it's going to be a little bit tougher. If you like those tight portraits, you can do it. It's going to take a lot of work on your part to find great locations and areas where birds might be coming close comfortably. And I mentioned a couple times, don't chase. If you want tight portraits, chasing the birds probably isn't going to work. So great locations will help, or alternatively, using a blind or a feeding type situation where you can set up some branches could also work very, very well for songbirds. So hope you liked the video. Hope I showed you a lot of examples. Hope maybe I inspired some people that are out there. Maybe you've got the longer focal lengths, and maybe you're going to be inspired to actually try some shorter focal lengths or some smaller in-frame scenes as well. So thanks for your support. Put some comments down below. Let me know what you thought of the video. If you like this, maybe I can do something similar again. And as always, thank you for your continued support of the channel. And I hope we can continue to find inspiration in wildlife together.